The rain against the windows of the Crescent Moon Cafe wasn't just a sound, it was a rhythm, a percussion ensemble against the historic glass of the French Quarter. Outside, Bourbon Street was a neon blur, its usual boisterous energy dampened into glistening, slick asphalt. But in here, in this pocket of perpetual midnight, the atmosphere was thick and warm. The air smelled of dark roast chicory coffee, old books, and the sweet, comforting cloud of powdered sugar from fresh beignets. Behind the polished mahogany counter, Miriam moved with a practiced, quiet grace. She was a fixture in this place, as much a part of its strange charm as the gas lamps flickering on the walls. Her hands, calloused from years of service, hauling bus tubs, gripping hot espresso pitchers, wiping down marble tables, were rarely still. She had her grandmother's eyes, people said, kind, deeply observant, and holding a hint of an older, quieter knowledge. Miriam had learned to read people the way others read the worn spines of the novels lining the cafe's back wall. She caught the subtle signs that spoke volumes about their hearts, their struggles, their needs. She knew the night shift ER nurse who needed her double espresso before she sat down, the heartbroken tourist who just needed someone to nod while they cried over a plate of untouched pastries, and the local musician who only ever ordered tap water, but always left a generous tip. The Crescent Moon was more than a cafe. It was a sanctuary, a liminal space where people came not just for coffee, but for the warmth of being truly seen, even in the darkest hours. This particular Tuesday evening started like any other. The familiar hiss of the steam wand, the low hum of conversation, and the mournful strains of a saxophone drifting in from the street filled the air. Miriam moved between tables, refilling mugs, clearing plates, and offering genuine smiles that had the power to cut through even the thickest gloom. Around 2 in the morning, when the city held its breath between the late-night revelers and the early-morning bakers, the brass bell above the door chimed. It was a different sound than usual, not the cheerful jingle of tourists, but a heavy, decisive thud. A man she had never seen before stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold, rain-soaked air with him. He was impeccably, almost unnaturally, still. His suit was not just expensive. It was crafted from a dark material that seemed to drink the light in the room. It was tailored in a style that felt centuries old, yet impossibly sharp. He was tall, and his presence was so commanding that the entire cafe seemed to fall silent, the conversations and clatter momentarily freezing. But it wasn't his suit or his stillness that held Miriam's attention. It was his posture. He looked weary, not with the tiredness of a long day, but with the bone-deep exhaustion of a long life. His dark hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had forgotten how to rest, and beneath that, a frantic, burning despair. Behind him, almost completely hidden in his imposing shadow, was a boy of about 10 years old. The child moved slowly, as if each step required a monumental effort. His pale complexion wasn't just pale, it was a luminous, translucent porcelain, almost blue under the warm gas lamps. Miriam noticed immediately how he kept one small hand pressed weakly against his chest, as if holding himself together. The man, clearly his father, guided him to the darkest corner booth with a protective, almost ferocious care, the care of someone who had learned to anticipate trouble at every turn. As Miriam approached their table with menus and her warmest, most disarming smile, she heard the man speaking in hushed, urgent tones into a sleek modern smartphone that looked jarringly out of place in his hand. "The resonance is failing," he was saying, a cold frustration creeping into his voice, which held a faint, unplaceable European accent. "Are you absolutely certain there's nothing in the codexes we missed? Thursday is unacceptable." "He won't last until Thursday." When he snapped the phone shut, Miriam could see the concern etched deep in his aristocratic features. "Welcome to the Crescent Moon," Miriam said gently, setting down glasses of ice water. "A force of habit. What can I get you folks started with tonight?" But even as she spoke, her experienced eyes were taking in details that would soon prove Toby life-altering. The boy, who his father introduced quietly as Orion, attempted a brave, fragile smile as he looked at the menu. But Miriam's trained eye caught what others might have missed. His breathing was alarmingly shallow, and every few minutes a tremor would pass through his small frame, forcing him to shift uncomfortably in the velvet-lined booth. When his father, who gave his name only as Sylvan, stepped outside into the rain-swept courtyard to take another urgent, furious call, Orion's facade began to crumble. "Everything looks so bright," Orion whispered, though Miriam noticed he was only pretending to read the menu. His small porcelain fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass, wincing as his fingertips touched the condensation. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" Miriam asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She didn't slide into the booth. She felt the cold, protective aura from the father even from a distance. But she leaned closer, infusing her words with the gentle authority of someone who knew what it was to care for the fragile. "You look a little cold." Orion glanced toward the window, where his father paced back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. His form a rigid silhouette against the wet brick. "Father says the healers are just being extra careful," he said, but his voice carried the hollow uncertainty of a child trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. "My chest hurts sometimes, but it's probably nothing serious." Miriam's instincts, honed not just by years of service, but by the strange, folkloric knowledge passed down in her grandmother's handwritten journal, began sending quiet alarms through her mind. She had read about symptoms like this, in passages she had always dismissed as fanciful nonsense. But seeing the boy in front of her, she saw the combination. The way he held his chest, the shallow breathing, the almost translucent, unearthly pallor. And then she saw it. The one detail that made the air lock in her lungs. When Orion blinked, his eyes, a deep, beautiful violet, revealed a faint, spidery network of silvery blue light in the whites. It was there for a fraction of a second, a vain map of something that was not human. When Sylvan returned to the table, Miriam noticed the deep lines of ancient worry that no amount of power or wealth could hide. "The alchemists are all occupied," he explained to Orion, forcing an optimism into his voice that was brittle and sharp. "But we'll see the council in Prague on Thursday. They are the best in the world." As Miriam took their order, a simple herbal tea with honey for Orion, who claimed he wasn't hungry, and a black coffee for Sylvan, who looked like he needed to anchor himself to the mortal world, she found herself studying the child. Her grandmother had always said that sometimes the most important thing you could do was trust the old knowledge. And right now, every instinct Miriam possessed was screaming at her that Thursday might be an eternity too late. During a quiet moment, as she was clearing an adjacent table, she approached Sylvan with a careful diplomacy, understanding the delicate balance between helping and overstepping. "I don't mean to intrude, sir," she began softly, her voice just for him, "but I've been in this city a long time. I've seen a lot of worried parents, a lot of people searching for answers they can't find." She paused, then took the plunge. "Sometimes, when you love someone that much, you just know when something isn't right, don't you?" Sylvan looked up from his untouched coffee, his dark eyes sharpening with a dangerous intensity. But beneath the threat, Miriam saw what she had seen in so many others, the raw, terrifying weight of fear. "The doctors say it's a simple bloodline fatigue," he said, his voice a low rumble. A rarity in one so young, but manageable. But his voice betrayed his own doubts. He has been dealing with this for weeks, but it has accelerated since yesterday. Miriam's heart ached for this strange, powerful man who was clearly fighting his own instincts in favor of some medical protocol that was failing. May I ask what exactly the healers have said? As Sylvan explained, or rather obfuscated, with vague terms like resonance failure and essence drain, Miriam kept her eyes on Orion. The boy had stopped pretending to be interested in his tea. He was holding his chest more frequently, and then a subtle but unmistakable sign made Miriam's pulse quicken. She was gathering plates from the table, her hands full of ceramic and cutlery. A single, silver-plated dinner fork slipped from her grasp. It didn't hit the floor. It clattered loudly against the marble top of the table next to theirs. It was just a sound. Orion screamed. It was not a child's tantrum. It was a high, thin wail of pure agony. He doubled over, his entire body seizing, clutching his chest as if the sound of the silver had been a physical blow. Sylvan was on his feet in an instant, his chair flying back, his eyes flashing a deep, unnatural red before settling back into their dark, worried state. "Orion!" But Miriam was frozen. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She dropped the rest of the plates, the crash echoing in the now silent cafe. She didn't care. She knew what this was. She had read the passage 100 times, thinking it was a fairy tale. Her grandmother's journal, filled with remedies for fever, for heartache, and for other things. The page she had memorized as a child because it sounded so strange. When the old blood turns pale as porcelain, when the breath grows shallow as a winter pond, and the eyes show the silver web. These are the signs. But the test is the echo. When the sound of silver strikes them as a blow, know that the ashen fade has taken root. You do not wait for specialists. You do not wait for Thursday. You act. This wasn't just a stomach ache. This wasn't bloodline fatigue. "Sir," Miriam said, her voice shaking but gaining an urgent new strength. She walked directly to their table, ignoring the stares of the other patrons. "Sylvan, I need you to listen to me, very carefully." He looked at her, his composure shattered, his gaze sharp enough to cut. "I'm not a doctor," she said, meeting his eyes. "And I don't know what a healer is, but I know what I just saw. And I think I know what's wrong with your son." Sylvan's face went white, a stark, dangerous pale. "What did you say?" "The doctors haven't seen what I've seen," Miriam interrupted, her voice kind but firm, echoing the words of the waitress in the story she'd been inspired by, but with a new, terrifying context. "He's not just sick. That thing, the sound of the silver, it's poisoning him. My grandmother wrote about this. She called it the ashen fade." Orion whimpered softly, doubling over again as another wave of pain hit him, the silvery blue web in his eyes flaring visibly this time. Miriam's eyes met Sylvan's, and in that moment she saw an ancient father's love override every protocol and procedure he'd been following. He looked at her, a human waitress in a 24-hour cafe, as if she were the only oracle left in the world. "What do you think I should do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But Miriam could hear the shift. He was finally ready to trust what his heart had been telling him all along. "I think," Miriam said, her heart hammering against her ribs, "that you can't take him to a hospital. And Thursday is too late. The journal, it says the remedy is specific. It's not a medicine. It's a process. And it has to be done now." Sylvan sprang into action with the decisiveness of a king. "You're right," he said, scooping the impossibly light form of Orion into his arms. He looked at Miriam, his ancient eyes locking onto hers, seeing her for the first time. Thank you for trusting your instincts when I was too blind to trust mine. He turned to leave, but Miriam grabbed her jacket and her grandmother's worn leather journal from behind the counter. "Wait," she called out, running after him. "You don't know what to do. I think I do. The journal explains it. I'm coming with you." Sylvan stopped at the door, the rain and wind whipping at his perfect suit. He looked at her, this brave, strange human. "Coming with me is not like taking a drive to the hospital, child. Where we are going, it is not on any map." "He doesn't have time," Miriam said firmly, clutching the journal to her chest. "He's your son." "Let me help." Sylvan stared at her for one long, unblinking second. Then he nodded, a grim, final decision made. "Then hold on," he commanded, in a tone that brooked no argument. He wrapped one arm securely around her, the other holding his son. And as the other patrons watched, baffled, the trio didn't walk out into the rain. They stepped into the shadow of the doorway and simply vanished. The transition was not a step. It was a fall. The warm, humid air of the New Orleans night vanished, sucked from Miriam's lungs and replaced by an absolute crushing cold. The sounds of rain, the distant saxophone, the hiss of the espresso machine, all gone. There was only a pressurized, deafening silence, a void that felt less like a place and more like an absence. It was the feeling of being at the bottom of a freezing, dark ocean. Her stomach revolted, and she would have cried out, but the air was too dense to draw a breath. She clutched the journal to her chest, the worn leather her only anchor to reality. Sylvan's arm was a band of iron around her waist, the only point of stability in the non-space. She could feel the desperate, cold power radiating from him, and beneath that, the fragile, trembling form of his son held protectively against his chest. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. Miriam's feet hit a floor not of worn linoleum, but of cold, echoing marble. The pressure vanished, and she gasped, dragging the new air into her lungs. It was wrong. The air was stale, cold, and carried the scent of ancient dust, dry paper, and a faint metallic tang, like ozone or old blood. She blinked, her eyes struggling to adjust. They were no longer in the cozy, brightly lit cafe. They were in a hall so vast it seemed impossible, a place of Gothic arches and soaring buttresses that vanished into a darkness so high above it might as well have been a night sky. The only light came from clusters of thick black candles, burning with flames that were a strange, unnervingly steady shade of blue. The silence here was different too, not the absence of sound, but the presence of it, the oppressive weight of millennia. "My lord, you have returned." The voice was dry, like old parchment scraping stone. Two figures emerged from the shadows, their forms seeming to congeal from the darkness itself. They were not human. One was a woman, ancient and severe, draped in heavy robes of dark velvet that seemed to absorb even the faint candlelight. Her face was a mask of aristocratic disdain, her skin as pale as Sylvan's, but her eyes held a cold, academic fury. The other was a man, thinner and more agitated, wearing something that looked like a leather scholar's apron over his anachronistic suit. He carried a brass astrolabe, which he fidgeted with nervously. They both ignored Miriam completely, their eyes fixed on the small, limp form in Sylvan's arms. "The resonance is collapsing, as predicted," the woman stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "We advised you the Prague excursion was a distraction. The boy must be placed in stasis." "He is fading, Lord Sylvan," the man added, his voice higher, more nasal. "The Alchemists' Guild is in agreement. The anomaly is accelerating. We must contain—" "You will be silent, both of you." Sylvan's voice was a low, dangerous rumble, echoing in the vast hall. It was not the voice of the worried father from the cafe. This was the command of a king. The two ancient beings recoiled, bowing their heads in deference. Only then did their cold, luminous eyes fall on Miriam. The woman's lip curled. "My lord, you have brought food?" "She is a guest," Sylvan corrected, his voice tight. He gently, almost reverently, placed Orion on a long black marble table that dominated the center of the hall. The boy looked even smaller, more fragile, in this monstrous, cold place. "You have brought a human into the sanctum?" the man hissed, his agitation overriding his fear. "The contamination." "This human," Sylvan interrupted, turning to face them, his shadow stretching long and menacing in the blue light, "is the only person in 2 months who has offered a diagnosis beyond your incompetent theories of resonance failure." He gestured toward Miriam, who was trembling, clutching her journal so hard her knuckles were white. "She saw what you did not," Sylvan continued, his voice dropping. "She named what you could not. She called it the ashen fade." The effect of the words was instantaneous. The nervous man dropped his astrolabe, the brass clattering loudly on the marble. The ancient woman's face, once a mask of cold disdain, fractured with disbelief and a flicker of fear. That is impossible," the woman whispered. "Ashen fade is a myth, a folk tale for hatchlings. It has not been seen in—" "It is not a myth," Miriam said, her voice shaking but finding a thread of strength. She took a step forward, away from the protection of Sylvan's shadow. "It's in here." She laid her grandmother's journal on the edge of the marble table, her calloused fingers flipping through the brittle, ink-stained pages. The two doctors looked at the book as if it were a piece of trash. "You would trust that? A grimoire of peasant superstitions over the combined knowledge of the conclave," the woman spat. "My grandmother wasn't a peasant," Miriam shot back, her fear being rapidly replaced by a protective anger. "She was a healer, and she wrote the truth." She found the page, her finger tracing the elegant, faded cursive. "Look." She turned the book toward them. She wrote, "The test is the echo. When the sound of silver strikes them as a blow, know that the ashen fade has taken root." I dropped a fork, a silver-plated fork, and he screamed. It wasn't the sound. It was the silver. Sylvan looked at his healers. "And what were your findings? That he was sensitive to high-frequency sonics? You were wrong." He turned his back on them, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and faced Miriam. His eyes, now softened from king to father, were desperate. "What do we do? Your book. What does it say?" Miriam's hands were trembling again. "The remedy. It's not a medicine. It's a process, a ritual. It says it has to draw the parasite out. It needs a base." She read from the page, her voice gaining confidence. "It needs the root of a moon-bound shade, filings of cold-forged iron, and a distillation of pure stillness." The male alchemist actually scoffed. "Moon-bound shade? That's just nightshade. Cold-forged iron? That's just iron. This is herbalism." "Then find me the herbalism," Sylvan roared, his patience snapping. "If you have these peasant ingredients, you will fetch them. Now." The two ancient creatures vanished, their pride warring with their terror of Sylvan. The woman, Isolde, gave Miriam one last look of pure hatred before dissolving into the shadows. Silence descended on the hall, broken only by Orion's shallow, rattling breaths. Miriam rushed to the boy's side, her instincts as a caregiver taking over. She gently touched his forehead. It was ice-cold. "He's so cold," she whispered. Sylvan moved to stand beside her. The sheer difference in their scale was dizzying. The ancient, powerful vampire king and the young waitress in her work-worn sneakers. He watched her, not as a king, but as a man. He saw her tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her brow furrowed in concentration as she reread the journal, completely unaware of the monstrous power standing inches from her. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice now quiet, stripped of its rage. "You should be terrified. You should be running." Miriam looked up, her kind, observant eyes meeting his. "Oh, I'm terrified," she admitted, a shaky laugh escaping her. "Believe me, this place feels like a dream I can't wake up from. But what?" "He's just a child," she said, nodding at Orion. "And you, in the cafe, you looked the way my mother did when my brother broke his arm? Just terrified. And so sure that no one was listening." She looked back at the journal. "My grandmother always said, the worst feeling in the world isn't being sick. It's being sick and alone." He's not alone. Sylvan was silent for a long time, watching her. He had lived for over 1,000 years. He had commanded armies, built empires, and seen stars wheel in their courses. He was used to beings cowering before him, or trying to flatter him or kill him. He was not used to this simple, profound human empathy. It was a language he had long forgotten. He found himself utterly, dangerously fascinated. The two doctors returned, their arms laden with items. The woman carried a bundle of dark, withered roots. The man held a small iron box and a crystal vial that seemed to contain a perfect, heavy vacuum. They threw them onto the table with ill-disguised contempt. "The ingredients," the woman sneered. "What now, little witch? Do we dance under the moon?" Miriam ignored her. She turned to Sylvan. "The book says we need a laboratory, a place to bind them. It needs a crucible and a flame." The alchemist, whose name was Magnus, perked up, his academic pride wounded. "A crucible? A simpleton's request? We have laboratories that can unmake light." He looked at Sylvan. "My lord, allow me. If we must perform this charade, let us at least do it with precision." Sylvan nodded. "Take us." Magnus led them from the great hall, down a spiraling stone staircase that seemed to descend into the very heart of the earth. The air grew warmer, smelling of sulfur, quicksilver, and strange, sharp spices. They entered a vast circular room. It was an alchemist's dream. Shelves lined with glowing vials, bubbling retorts, charts of the constellations, and a great brass and copper contraption of pipes and lenses at its center. "The orrery is not prepared for this," Magnus muttered. "We don't need that," Miriam said, pointing to a simple, heavy-duty marble workbench with a stone basin and a Bunsen burner. "We need that." Magnus looked positively insulted, but Sylvan's glare silenced him. For the next hour, Miriam became an unlikely conductor. She was no longer a waitress. She was her grandmother's descendant. "Crush the roots, not with metal, with stone," she commanded, and the ancient woman, Isolde, ground the nightshade with a mortar and pestle, her movements stiff with rage. "The iron. It has to be shaved, not ground. Fine, like dust." Sylvan, the vampire king, took the block of cold iron and, with his bare hands, began scraping it with an alchemical file, his movements precise, his superhuman strength producing a fine, glittering powder. Miriam herself took the vial of stillness and, following the journal's instructions, began a careful distillation process, adding droplets of purified water to the void-like substance, which hissed and steamed. They worked in tense silence, the only sounds the scrape of iron, the grinding of stone, and the bubble of the distiller. Miriam, Sylvan, and the two ancient vampires all focused on a single task, bound by the scribbles in a dead woman's journal. Finally, the components were ready. A pile of dark root paste, a small mound of glittering iron dust, and a beaker of liquid that was perfectly, unnaturally clear. "Now what?" Sylvan asked, his hands, stained with iron, uncharacteristically still. Miriam read the final passage for this section. It says, "Bind the three with fire, the shadow, the earth, and the stillness. Let them become one. This is the base." She carefully mixed the three components in a heavy iron crucible. The mixture was a thick, black, inert sludge. "Okay," she said, taking a breath. "Now, the flame." She placed the crucible over the burner and lit the flame. The concoction hissed. It bubbled. A noxious, purple-black smoke rose, smelling of ozone and decay. Orion, even from the doorway where Sylvan had laid him on a cot, let out a pained, weak cry. The silvery blue web in his eyes flared, and he began to tremble. It's working," Miriam said, her heart leaping. It's drawing it. It's attracting the parasite." But as she watched, the bubbling slowed. The smoke thinned. The mixture, instead of activating, began to cool, congealing into a useless blackened crust. "No," Miriam whispered, frantically turning up the flame. "No, come on." Isolde, the ancient woman, let out a dry, cruel laugh. "Of course, it has failed. We told you, Lord Sylvan, the human's folk remedy is a failure. You have entertained us. Now, let us take the boy to stasis before he is lost for good." Orion gasped, his small body arching in a silent, agonizing spasm. The silvery light in his eyes flickered like a dying star. Sylvan looked at the failed crucible, then at Miriam, his hope, which had been so bright, turning to ash. "Miriam," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What did we miss?" Miriam's eyes were scanning the page, her hands shaking so badly she could barely read. I don't know. It said, "This is the base. The base. It's not the final step." She flipped the page. "Oh, God." "What?" Sylvan demanded, rushing to her side. "What is it?" "It says the base is... It's just the vessel," she stammered, her face pale. "It's inert. It needs an igniter. It needs a heart of warmth, freely given." I don't know what that means. What is a heart of warmth? What does that mean?" Orion's breathing stopped. The silvery light in his eyes went dark. "He is gone," Isolde said, her voice flat. "No," Sylvan breathed, his world collapsing. "No!" Miriam shouted, staring at the journal, then at her own hand, then at the congealed, useless sludge in the crucible. "A heart of warmth, freely given. Oh, God, I think I know." "A heart of warmth, freely given," Miriam repeated, the words tasting strange in her mouth. She looked at the blackened, useless sludge in the crucible. She looked at the ancient, powerful healers who saw only failure. She looked at Sylvan, his kingly facade shattered, revealing the raw, broken heart of a father. And she looked at Orion, his small chest still, the silver in his eyes now a dead, dark void. "Freely given," she whispered again. It wasn't a riddle. It was an instruction. "Miriam, what is it?" Sylvan pleaded, his voice a hoarse rasp. "It needs a human heart," Miriam said, her voice shaking but resolute. Not to take it, to ignite it. The base is it's just the tinder. It needs a spark, a living, warm, human spark. That's the one thing you don't have here. Warmth." Isolde, the ancient healer, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "What? What are you implying, human? Do you mean to—" "It needs my blood," Miriam said, cutting her off. She met Sylvan's gaze, and in that moment, she was no longer afraid of him, or this place, or the shadows. The journal is folk magic. It's literal. A heart of warmth. My heart is warm, my blood is warm, and I am giving it. Sylvan recoiled as if struck. "No, I will not. I will not ask that of you. There must be another way. There isn't, Miriam cried, pointing at the cot. He's not breathing. Freely given, Sylvan. You can't take it. I have to offer it. We don't have time. She is right, my lord, Magnus, the alchemist, said, his voice trembling with a new, strange excitement. The base is inert because it lacks a living, mortal catalyst. It is genius. It is base, gutter magic. But genius! Be silent, Sylvan roared, torn. He looked from his son's still form to Miriam's determined face. Miriam didn't wait for his permission. She turned to Isolde. Give me a knife. Isolde's thin lips twisted into a cruel smile. This, she understood. This was sacrifice. She produced a small, impossibly sharp silver scalpel from a fold in her robes and offered it, handle first, to Miriam. Be quick about it, little witch, though it is already too late. Miriam ignored the jibe. Her hand, the one that had wiped tables and served coffee just an hour ago, was steady. Sylvan watched, his face a mask of agony, as she pressed the blade to her own palm. She didn't flinch, drawing a deep, clean line across her lifeline. Bright red, shockingly vital blood welled up. She clenched her fist over the iron crucible, letting her blood drip, drip, drip onto the cold, black sludge. This is not taken, Miriam said, her voice echoing with a strange power in the ancient laboratory. This is given. The instant the first drops hit the mixture, it ignited. It was not a fire. It was an implosion of light. A column of pure, white gold energy erupted from the crucible. A heat so intense it was not heat at all, but a presence. The noxious purple smoke was burned away, replaced by a scent of ozone, iron, and, strangely, of rain on hot pavement, the scent of life. It's working, Magnus gasped, shielding his eyes. It is not enough, Isolde countered, pointing. The mixture it is rejecting the boy. She was right. The white gold light was brilliant, but it was contained within the crucible. It was not reaching Orion. The journal, Miriam stammered, her head spinning from the sudden drain. It's ignited, but it's not connected. Sylvan was at her side, his ancient cold hand supporting her arm. What does it mean, Miriam? Miriam looked at her bleeding hand, then at the cot. The blood is the igniter, but the heart is the bridge. Before Sylvan could stop her, she broke from his grasp. She ran the few feet to the cot, her hand held out. It's a parasite, right? She said, her voice a desperate pant. It's drawn to the silver, but the silver is dead. It needs life. She slammed her bleeding palm flat against Orion's chest, right over his still heart. The connection was instantaneous. The white gold light in the crucible, now fed by her blood, found its target. A brilliant arc of energy, as bright as a welder's torch, leaped from the crucible and struck Miriam in the back. It passed through her, and her entire body was engulfed in a blinding golden aura. She screamed as the power surged into her, 1,000 volts of pure, sanctified life. And then it flowed out of her, through her bloody hand and into Orion. The boy's small body arched off the cot, his back bowing in a violent, agonizing spasm. He let out a shriek that was not his own. It was a high, thin, metallic sound, the sound of the parasite. Hold on, sweetheart, Miriam wept, pushing down with all her weight, the light burning her, the energy draining her. You have to fight. Fight it. It's too strong, Sylvan shouted, moving to pull her away. It will kill you, Miriam. It will drain you dry. No, Miriam yelled, her eyes squeezed shut. It's not killing him with silver. It's outliving it. It's empathy, Sylvan. It's my warmth against its cold. Help me. Sylvan froze. He looked at the human girl, burning with a light his kind could not touch, sacrificing herself for his child. He had seen millennia of war, of magic, of power. He had never seen this. He placed his own cold, powerful hands over Miriam's, adding his strength, his will, his desperate kingly command, channeling his own dark ancient energy into her, not to fight the parasite, but to support the vessel. The combined force was deafening. The golden light turned into a vortex, and then the ashen fade broke. From Orion's eyes, from his pale skin, from his lips, a torrent of silvery blue, web-like light was pulled. It was a living, sentient thing, a creature of cold and hunger, and it shrieked as it was drawn from its host. It flowed like reverse lightning, up Miriam's arm, through her, and into the waiting, white-hot crucible. The crucible flared, a final, blinding white pulse. The light vanished, the sound stopped, and the black sludge within the crucible, now filled with the captured silvery blue light of the parasite, instantly cooled and hardened, sealing the creature inside a prison of dark, solid iron. Silence. Absolute, profound silence. Miriam collapsed, her strength gone, falling boneless to the stone floor. Sylvan didn't catch her. He was frozen, his eyes locked on the cot. Orion was still, utterly still. The light was gone. The cold was gone. "My lord," Isolde whispered, stepping forward, her face ashen. "He is." A small, sharp gasp. Orion's chest hitched. He took a ragged, shuddering, deep breath. His porcelain skin, once a sickly, translucent blue, was now a healthy, vibrant pale. He took another breath, and another, and his cheeks flushed with a faint, rose-colored life. "Father?" Sylvan fell to his knees at the side of the cot, his ancient, aristocratic composure shattering into a million pieces. He didn't speak. He simply reached out a trembling hand and laid it on his son's head, his shoulders shaking with the force of 1,000 years of suppressed emotion. Orion's eyes fluttered open. They were no longer a deadened, web-filled void. They were a clear, brilliant, curious violet. The ashen fade was gone. "Father," Orion whispered again, a small, sleepy smile touching his lips. I had a strange dream. There was a lady. She was warm." Only then did Sylvan seem to remember. He spun around. Miriam was lying on the floor, pale, exhausted, her hand a bloody mess. But she was smiling, a weak, tired smile. Sylvan was at her side in an instant. He looked at Isolde and Magnus, who were staring at the scene, their entire worldview, their millennia of arcane knowledge rendered utterly obsolete. "Out!" Sylvan commanded, his voice soft, but more dangerous than any shout. "Both of you! Your knowledge is nothing. Your conclaves are dust. You are dismissed." They bowed, their faces a mixture of shame and terror, and vanished, leaving the three of them alone in the laboratory. Sylvan gently, reverently, lifted Miriam from the floor, as if she were made of the most fragile glass. He sat her on a stone bench, then took her bleeding hand. He didn't use magic. He didn't call for a healer. He walked to a cabinet, retrieved a clean linen cloth, a bowl of water, and a jar of simple herbal salve. He knelt on the floor before her, the vampire king kneeling before the human waitress, and began to clean her wound. You saved him," he said, his voice thick, his eyes never leaving her hand. "After all my power, my healers, my wealth, it was you." "It was my grandmother," Miriam whispered, her energy returning. "And you. You're the one who was brave enough to trust a peasant superstition." He finished bandaging her hand, his touch impossibly gentle. He looked up at her, and his ancient eyes were no longer cold, or powerful, or desperate. They were new. "I offered my healers wealth, power, lands. What can I offer you, Miriam? I am a king. Ask me for anything, a palace, gold, eternal life. It is yours." This was the moment, the fairy tale reward. Miriam looked at her bandaged hand, then at the ancient, beautiful, tired man before her. Then she looked at the cot, where Orion was already drifting into a true, healthy sleep. She smiled. I don't want a palace, and I think I like my heart of warmth, right where it is. I just want to go home. She paused. I think I'm late for my shift. Sylvan stared at her, and then, for the first time in perhaps 500 years, he laughed. It was a low, rusty sound, but it was real. Of course, he said, standing. He offered her his hand, not as a king to a subject, but as a man to a friend. Allow me to take you. The journey back was not the cold, terrifying fall it had been before. He held her hand, and this time the shadows were warm. And in the space of a single heartbeat, they were standing not in the sanctum, but in the rain-washed, pre-dawn silence of the alley behind the crescent moon. The city was waking up. A baker's truck rumbled by, filling the air with the smell of fresh bread. Will he be okay? Miriam asked, clutching her bandaged hand. He will, Sylvan said. He was cloaked in the shadows of the alley, but he seemed less a creature of the night, and more just a man, reluctant to say goodbye. You saved us both, Miriam. He stepped back, and the shadows began to reclaim him. Sylvan, she called out, stopping him. Yes? Will I see you again? He was silent for a long moment. My son is very fond of beignets. I imagine he will want to thank you properly. And then he was gone. Miriam walked back into the cafe, the bell jangling. Her co-worker, just arriving for the morning shift, looked at her. Rough night, Miri? You look like you've seen a ghost. Miriam just smiled, picking up her apron. Something like that. A few nights later, Miriam was working the late shift. The cafe was quiet, just a few tourists and the regular night shift nurse. The bell above the door chimed, a polite, gentle sound. Miriam looked up, and her heart skipped a beat. It was Sylvan, but not. He wasn't the king. He was wearing a simple, dark cashmere sweater and dark jeans. He looked normal, impossibly handsome, and devastatingly normal. And he was holding the hand of his son, Orion. The boy was no longer a porcelain doll. He was vibrant, his violet eyes bright with curiosity, his cheeks holding a healthy, human-like flush. He was wearing a small pea coat and looked like any other child. They sat at a booth. Miriam approached, her notepad in her hand, her heart hammering. Welcome to the Crescent Moon, she said, her voice catching. Hello, Miriam, Sylvan said, and his smile was warm. We would like 2 orders of beignets, and a black coffee, please. And hot chocolate, Orion added, his voice bright and clear. With a lot of whipped cream. Miriam laughed, writing it down, coming right up. When she brought the orders, Sylvan looked up at her, his expression serious. My healers, he said, his voice low. The ones you met. They are studying. Your grandmother's journal. They are relearning. They're okay? Miriam asked, surprised. They are humbled, Sylvan said, which for them is a new and valuable education. They spent 1,000 years looking for complex answers in equations and ancient texts. They saw my son as a specimen, a puzzle to be solved. He reached across the table, his fingers gently brushing her bandaged hand. You just saw a child. You saw a father who was afraid. You didn't look at us and see monsters. You just saw people. Miriam sat down in the booth across from them. My grandmother always wrote that the most important ingredient wasn't the herb or the root. It was the intent. I guess the greatest wisdom isn't about how much you know. Sylvan finished her thought, his ancient eyes holding hers. It's about how much you are willing to see. He sipped his coffee. Orion, his face a disaster of powdered sugar and whipped cream, beamed at her. The lesson, Miriam realized, was simple. In a world full of healers who couldn't heal, of experts who had no answers, and kings who were powerless, the greatest strength, the only magic that truly mattered, was the one her grandmother had been writing about all along. It was not power, or knowledge, or immortality. It was the brave, simple, and world-changing act of looking at another, no matter how different, and choosing to connect. It was compassion, and it was the only bridge that could ever span the impossible darkness between two worlds.